All right. Welcome, John. How's your day out in Utah?
No, it's been great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we love what Leland's doing to make sure that vets and anyone else watching that's applying to an MBA has access to coaching. Um, John, you have a pretty interesting background before being a founder. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we can kind of jump into what Leland does and kind of thinking about for someone that's watching this that is in the military thinking, what should I do next? I think this will be a really good discussion about how to think about an MBA and the very high level, kind of demystifying the process.
Yeah, that sounds great. I can share my screen here and we can jump into it. Um, so yeah, I mean we do events like this all the time. So kind of made some small tweaks, but I'm excited to kind of talk through it. So my background, worked at Uber, LinkedIn, and a startup called Curated. I also founded a little MBA admissions consulting business called deferredmba.com, focused specifically on deferred applicants, but since then have done a bunch of traditional applicants as well, and of course helped thousands of folks from the military apply. Got my MBA at Stanford, and then founded Leland while I was there. So I've personally helped thousands of applicants apply to top MBA programs, and we'll share some of my experience as a coach and as a founder of Leland, and as someone that's kind of ran boot camps and created content in this space. But obviously, would love for this to be a conversation. I'm sure you have lots of interesting tips too, Wyatt. So feel free to interrupt me or
Yeah. Well,
come in.
I don't have the ultimate flex of choosing GSB. You know, the you're like the 10% of the yield, right? That doesn't yield to HBS. I think 8.5 or 9% of that goes to GSB, probably vice versa. So maybe another one you can express why you decided on GSB over HBS. But yeah, definitely willing to kind of jump in whenever. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're the expert here, man. Excited to listen.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I would have been thrilled to go to HBS or GSB. I felt like personally, the GSB was a better fit for me and what I was trying to do. I wanted to start a company when I was there. Of course, you can start a company at any of the top MBA programs, but I felt like the GSB just had so many resources, so many local VCs, so many other classmates pursuing entrepreneurship. So it felt like just a
Yeah,
really good fit. And I was in the Bay Area already. So, yeah,
proximity is so huge there. I mean, you're
it is. Yeah, it's super helpful. We're in San Francisco and just moved down, 30 minutes. So it was a nice
yeah.
transition. Yeah, just a quick like intro on Leland. We're at this point the largest platform for MBA admissions consultants out there. We have hundreds of professional consultants and alumni or students. So it's kind of a mix. We're trying to be affordable, accessible. These are independent admissions consultants, many of them that were former admissions officers at we have, former admissions officers at Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Booth, Kellogg, Columbia, a bunch of the top programs. But then we also have folks like me or you who are going to charge a lot less than them and can be, a nice sounding board. So our goal is to, and this week's been especially fun, but we've been getting tons of admissions updates from people, and so our goal is obviously to help you and the folks
Yeah,
that listen to this get into school. It's like the best weeks are at Leland are the ones where we get all the updates. So that's
yeah. Same
super
same for the account. We love Kyle posts all the stuff that
so
we
fun.
get. It's super cool, yeah, to see people because I mean, for those of us that have gone to top MBA programs, we know how fun it is. I mean, I feel like it's not fair to have this much fun like for 2 years as an adult and make the friends, make the connections, but also you understand the access that you gain from having something like this, and you can kind of see the way that the world's going to change for people.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you guys are doing such a good job with that too. So, um, anyways, let's talk. Let's just jump in and again, this presentation will be kind of like purposefully at the surface level. We'll dive deeper into certain topics, but just kind of give you a lay of the land and most importantly, anyone that's listening, like I want you to leave feeling like you can do this. It's not meant to be like not meant to stress you out in any way, but more just to give you all the information so you can kind of know where to start, what to think about. And I'm sure Wyatt, you can attest, like it is an overwhelming process. There's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot that you like don't know anything about when you first get going. So trying to just kind of dive into some of these topics. But let's start first with kind of choosing which schools to apply to. I think most people start with like, oh, I just want to go to like the best school. And I think that's like a fair, honestly, a fair thing to think about, and ranking does matter. But there's so many other things, and I mentioned this when you asked earlier. Location is a big one. Exit opportunities, what your classmates are pursuing. There's like big cultural differences between the different schools and what people are pursuing. So I was talking to my brother-in-law who's at Kellogg right now, and there's so many people interested in consulting, and consulting is big on any MBA any MBA program, Stanford as well. But I think it's like much more prevalent in certain campuses than others, and I think that's true of tech, that's true of finance, that's true of entrepreneurship and other things as well.
Yeah. How many of your classmates at GSB did investment banking?
There was one that did an investment banking internship, and then
One
didn't go back to it. Yeah.
out of 450. So scale that up to HBS or Wharton. It's like two. Yeah, I think
What
Wharton
about you?
had
What about Wharton?
60 or 70.
Yeah.
So about 10% of the class. I think HBS is probably 20 to 30. So it's still a fair amount, but certainly, yeah, I had a friend that's trying to decide schools, and he got into GSB, and he's like, I want to go into investment banking. And I'm like, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but like you should think about that when you're deciding. He got into every school he applied to. So
Well,
like,
yeah.
hey, I know the weather's great in Palo Alto, but if that's really, really what you want to do, like
Yeah,
figure out, which school to go to. So yeah, completely agree there.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great call. Yeah, I think your career plans, the exit ops, the types of companies that come to recruit, I think it matters a lot. And then it also just like the network you build, right? If you have 60 classmates going into investment banking, and you go to a bank and like a year in, you're thinking about making a change, like you already have all these classmates that you can call on. So maybe you can get into investment banking going to the GSB, but you're not going to have as much of your network in that world. But you
Mhm.
might have more in VC or PE. So if you're trying to pivot, there's different things. So and
Right.
probably not more. There's tons of people from Horton and HBS that are going into PE too. So but definitely
Yeah.
just worth kind of digging in there. And then of course, cost matters a lot. I think there are certain schools that are need based when it comes to scholarships and fellowships, and others that are merit based. So the GSB is need based. So is HBS, which means they looked at how many kids I had, they looked at my salary, they looked at my savings, and then they gave me a fellowship kind of out of their formula. They don't look at that. They don't look at that when you apply. There's need blind. But there was no like merit based anything. Versus some schools, it's almost like a negotiation, and you can get actually quite a bit of money merit based. So
Yeah.
definitely worth like evaluating some of those options as well.
It's also for vets, I'll add yellow ribbon. I think Stanford and HBS are full yellow ribbon. Wharton just started it, but not all schools will cover the difference between what the VA pays and what the school will pay. So the GI Bill is one consideration, that it's not the same at every school, which is
Yeah.
something to consider.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. There are also lots of additional scholarships specifically for vets, and I'm sure you have other videos and topics on this, but it seemed like there were a lot of different options on top of whatever you get from like the school itself. So definitely worth looking into.
I
Um,
think one thing I don't see on here, which I'll always tell people,
yeah,
is be realistic. I mean, if you have a 400 GMAT, A, retake it. B, like probably don't apply to M7 schools.
yeah,
But second, like don't, if you do I have a friend at HBS this year who had a 660 GMAT. Like I
don't
don't
rule
see
yourself.
on here your scores, your profile.
That's a great one. Yeah, good addition. Yeah, that's really important. You definitely, as you think about the schools to apply to, I think factoring in their acceptance rates and your stats. I always tell people like, don't be the one to reject yourself because you just don't know what they're looking for. And to your friend's story, like he could have easily said, I'm so far below the averages, it's not worth applying. But they do look at more than just your test score. They know you're not a walking test score. They want you and everything you bring. um,
Hmm.
but that being said, like if you are below averages, it is riskier to apply to only one or two or three schools. You should build a mix of schools that you feel like you can, some that are reach, some that are kind of exactly where you should be, and then some that are safety schools. Um, and be thoughtful about that. And all it takes is one, but you definitely, it's nice to have options too.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. So moving on to just like the application process. And again, there are more pieces to this. And probably the piece that I don't necessarily talk about here is like the life you've lived. And that like, kind of gets summarized in all of these things, but who you are and the accomplishments you've had is so important. But just to kind of talk through a couple of them. So you need to take the GMAT or the GRE. I'm just getting a little bit of an echo. I don't know if that, okay, I think that might be gone. Um, the GMAT and the GRE, you can take either one. It does not matter. And you shouldn't listen to anyone that tells you you need to take the GMAT. You can take either one. So pick the
Is there
test.
one? Is there one you find that suits? I hear people say the math is easier on the GRE. If you're more inclined towards verbal, do that one.
Yeah.
Is there a real difference? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah. So there is. And I would say, you can take, I would say take a cold test on both and see where you're at. But I would say typically, um, American test takers tend to do better on the GRE comparatively, I think. Now, if you have a really quantitative background, the GMAT might suit you really well. And I would say, like all things held equal, if you're going to be well above average on either test, I think you can take
Mhm.
that because more like the GMAT is sort of like the score they've published historically, but like they don't have a preference. They want to just kind of check that box and move on to the rest of your application. But I would say, yeah, the even for people that kind of say, I'm pretty good at math, like the GMAT is just it's an intense quant section, and I think that I would say it's harder than a lot of people expect. And there's a lot of people that like pound their head on the GMAT for like years and can't crack it. And if they were to just switch tests, they'd be above average. And that just like don't do that. It's crazy. We see it all the time. Like because they had an uncle that told them they needed to take the GMAT, they stick with it, forever, and then they don't get in. So take the test you're going to do best on.
Yeah.
Um, and then okay, so moving on to some of the other things. So application strategy, which is sort of like this vague thing, but I think what it really is like what's the headline of who you are and why should it matter to them? And this is really important because they care about who you are. They know you're not a walking resume, and they want to know why that's going to matter in the world, and why they want to stamp the Wharton brand or the Booth brand or the GSB brand on you. And so, kind of the strategy of how you piece the recommendations together, your essays, and everything into a story that can really resonate with the admissions committee, is super important. Um, Letters of recommendation. It depends a little bit on the school, but typically you're getting two rec letters. Typically they want one to come from a former direct manager or someone that has overseen you and your work. Maybe you, Wyatt, would have some more takes on what does this look like from a military standpoint. But yeah, typically you need one that's kind of director, and then the other one often is a director, someone that's seen your work, but it can be a little bit more extracurricular or someone that's not just like square down the middle manager. I don't know if you have any tips on
Yeah.
for vets.
Yeah. I had an interesting. I mean, one for those that are in the military should be a commander. Should be someone that's your direct supervisor. If your direct supervisor is someone that you just do not get along with, or they're bad. In my case, actually, my direct supervisor was actually getting kicked out of the military, so I didn't want to ask him for. I mean, I didn't want to ask him because I think he was going through a pretty rough go of it. Um, and frankly, I didn't really respect the person, but I looked to my commander just before, and I included that in there. There was a couple schools that asked like, hey, if this person's not your direct supervisor, why? And he said, hey, my current direct supervisor is actually undergoing disciplinary actions. I I don't think it mattered. I mean, I got admitted to several schools, so I
Yeah.
think that's totally fine. And then my other one actually was another officer who was a rank above me and was in the organization that I worked in, oversaw me a lot. And I knew that he'd advocate for me. I knew that he'd seen me do my best work. And, he wasn't a supervisor per se, but he was ahead of you. I probably wouldn't recommend asking your peer, although I've seen people that like co-found a business on the side do that for their co-founder. But typically you should have at
Yeah.
least one rank above. The other thing to look at, I think, is you don't want someone too many ranks above unless you've been like a general's A. So just because you know a general or a CEO, right? If you're in the civilian world, like just because you know them and like or they're like your dad's friend, it doesn't mean much if the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff writes you a letter of
Yes.
rec and he can't say I've seen you work. If it's just kind of this like very general letter, they'll just say, okay, this person just knew this guy and got him to write a letter because they thought it would be impressive. It's much more impressive to see your commander say this person's an exceptional individual because I've seen them in XYZ situation than to see a general say, this guy's great, or this
Yeah.
girl, like they know what they're doing. So
Yep.
don't go too far above.
Yeah, those are really good tips. And I have a slide that will go a little bit deeper even on recommendations, but those are spot on. Definitely pick people that know you well. You do not want a weak letter that needs to be a table thumping like this person is excellent. And just
Mhm.
person's important. Often means that they don't know you as well, but that is very much a nice to have if they do know you very well and are going to write a table thumping letter. So anyways, yeah, and then extracurriculars, I think this is kind of showing you and in a light that shows that you're have genuine interest in certain fields that could be relevant to them. This is often harder for military folks that are, have been deployed and are busy, obviously. But I think that this there are ways to kind of show interests and show kind of involvement in different areas, even within the military or
Yeah,
in graduate work.
does it need to be professional? I mean, what are some of the
No.
things you've seen? I hear people worry like, oh, this isn't a professional sounding extracurricular, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so maybe one principle I would say is if it matters to you, it can matter to them. It just matters like how you frame it. There's people that I've heard of like, they nannied through college and this applicant, she was like, oh, like this isn't impressive at all, but I learned so much that informed how I think about like building a company in the childcare space or whatever. And so it like sort of actually did matter to her long-term aspirations and goals for enabling working parents. And maybe in the military, it's something that you've been involved in that's just like a passion project in sports or climate or education or defense or whatever it is that may just be kind of a passion project here or there. But how you frame that and kind of position that for your long-term goals is really important. But this is hard, right? This isn't easy for someone that has been dedicating their life to defending the country.
Yeah.
So something that you can kind of work on with friends, family, coaches, other folks in your corner. Um, Awards and honors, these things, again, some people feel really nervous that they don't have like a bunch of trophies or medals or awards here. But there's a lot of things that can kind of check this box. One could be as simple as like the dean's list or having, academic excellence in your undergraduate program while balancing other things and other pursuits. There's a lot of ways to kind of position awards and honors as actually just accomplishments. Maybe there wasn't a trophy associated with them, but it might
Yeah.
be something interesting.
I'll also add for vets that are watching this, do not put your ribbons and standard awards. I don't know what it would be for the Navy. In the Army Achievement Medal, do not put that down. It's basically a did you do like it's basically an acknowledgement in place of what you would have as a bonus. Typically in the Army, we say if it's Bronze Star with or above, and I won't bore John with the specifications
Yeah.
with what that means. But unless there's something that you uniquely did to earn like a Bronze Star or above, don't put down routine military medals and don't put down schools that you went through that were not costly, right? You're being vetted against other veterans. So if every veteran that applies has the National Defense Service Medal, it means a lot less, right? And a lot of
Okay.
these schools do have veterans check over the resumes or at least say like, hey, does this person check out as a good candidate? So be mindful that you're not putting down standard issue stuff that every single other person in your industry, being the military, gets.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good advice. And I think along those same lines, like figuring out how to translate what the award was into terms that make it really easy for people to understand why this was
Yes.
impressive and why this wasn't just you showing up or kind of doing what everyone else does, but shows kind of initiative, leadership, other things. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So your resume, I think resume is super important for kind of highlighting the bullet points on your objective achievement and everything that you've accomplished in your career. And I think this is also, the vets that I've worked with, this can be hard to always kind of translate that back into why it
Hmm.
mattered to an admissions committee. But I'd be curious to get your thoughts too, Wyatt, on resume specifically.
I,
But there's typically a lot more work that goes into a resume versus like a resume you'd use for a job, because I think MBA programs care about your involvement, your leadership, and there are things that they are going to so they're going to care a lot about you managing teams, you inspiring, leading people, you exerting influence and kind of accomplishing things. That might be more important to them than like really tactical things that could be interesting for a job application.
yeah, I actually tell vets like have a vet look over a resume maybe first, like to make sure that is in the format that's required and like there's not just
Yeah.
egregious errors, like which is fine, right? Like we're all coming from a place that like resumes aren't a thing in the military. So maybe have a vet check it first. But I do caution veterans like one benefit of Leland is like you can find a civilian and it doesn't even have to be someone that's like a career coach or an expensive coach. You can find someone that's a current student, just say, does this make sense? Like read my resume and
Yeah.
I should not have to explain anything to you and you should be able to
Yeah.
say, oh, i don't I don't 100% know the context, but I can tell that you've achieved, that you were top of your
Yes.
class. This generally makes sense. Don't overdo it. Don't try to overly civilianize things by saying that you were like the CEO equivalent is like one joke in the military. Like
Yeah.
put titles. Like people are okay with you saying like, I was a platoon leader, and you can
Yeah.
just put, people understand, like we're not going to completely understand, but don't say like, I was a senior vice president. People will look at that and be like, that's weird. Like there's no
Yeah.
SVPs in the military.
Yeah.
Yeah, figure out, have someone that's not a vet look over, because a vet looking over your resume will fill in gaps that a civilian just can't. So I always recommend to vets that they have a non-vet look at their resume, and you shouldn't have to explain it because you won't be able to sit in front of an adcom and explain your resume.
Yep. Yep. That's great. That's great advice. Yeah, we often have a hard time like looking at our own resume and kind of knowing what needs some explanation. But typically, like, yeah, you can put like, all right, I was this platoon leader and like selected from what as one of, whatever, or like
Mm-hmm.
explain to them why that is selective or why that's impressive without, yeah, like actually changing the title. Like you don't need to like change things. It's like kind of an explanation and just enough context that helps them understand.
Yeah.
Um, we'll dive deeper into essays in just a minute, but obviously essays are incredibly important and they are different across different schools. So kind of the different types of essays you can approach in different ways. And then the interview, frankly, I wouldn't even worry about the interview until you start to get interviews. Most of the
Yeah.
time, it's going to be a deep dive into you. And that kind of preparation is typically best like once you get the interview and kind of tailored to the type of interview you'll be getting. But maybe just a couple notes like sometimes your interviewer will have read your entire application and they're going to go through like line item by line item, and so don't like lie to
Mm-hmm.
your resume, don't like be truthful, because they are going to spot check things. And I've heard of people that like said their greatest ambition was to go and start a VC fund in Dubai or somewhere, something like that, or list a few countries that they're really interested in, and in the interview they said like, tell me three companies that you're interested in investing in Dubai. And they were like, oh, like that was something I was thinking about doing, but I like it just sounded nice. And then they got kind of caught
Sure.
up. So anything you put in your application could be talked about in your interview. And that's pretty much the only thing I would say to think about before you actually have the interview itself. But
Yeah.
just, be honest and truthful there. So
Yeah. I think each school's personality also shows in the interview. I
yeah,
had I had interviews at Wharton, Booth, GSB. Uh, got into Booth and Wharton. GSB's was way more casual than
yeah,
I than Wharton's. Wharton's was not that deep into you. It was like this team-based discussion, which is a totally different topic. Booth's was similar to GSB, was like an alumni, kind of talks to you for a while, very personable. HBSs, I didn't get an interview at HBS, but the people that I talked to that get interviews at HBS are like, it feels like it's like the Hunger Games, and you go in
It's pretty
there and they're
intense.
like, all right, tell me about this, tell me about that. Like, what were you thinking about this? What were you thinking about that?
Yep.
Sounds pretty intense. And that's really the only school that I've heard of being quite that formal. You have to fly to Cambridge. A lot of the other schools will link you up with a local veteran. I did my interviews during COVID, so it was all virtual. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
I do think
HBS
that the
still gives you the
interviews,
virtual option, but most of the time it's recommended to fly there and be there in
sure,
person. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
they want to show you Cambridge. You walk onto HBS's
Yeah, it's
campus,
a little
and
bit of a sell day. Yeah.
it's pretty impressive. But anyway, not to dive too deep into that.
No, that's great. Okay, let's dive into just a couple of these topics and we've already covered some of it, but timeline's tough because everyone's timeline's a little bit different. But just to kind of give you a sense for like what you should be thinking about at certain times. So kind of like a year, I mean, outside of a year, there's obviously things you can be doing, but it mostly is about kind of succeeding in your job or your role in the military and building relationships with people that will be your recommenders, will be your advocates, will be people that might apply to business school a couple of years ahead of you, so you can ask them questions when the time comes to apply. But it's mostly about like just building a successful career and a strong reputation. You can start to dig into like different schools you're interested in. But as you start to get closer to that year mark, that's when it's like, all right, start to be thinking about the GMAT or the GRE, start to study, start to figure out your plan, whether you're going to have a tutor, whether you're going to do kind of a self-paced course. There's all sorts of different options. We have a bunch of tutors on the platform, but there's also great content providers. I also think that there are a lot of overpriced content options out there. So find someone that can help you and can give you good advice.
Um,
Yeah,
Also, GMAT GRE are good for 5 years, right? And if that hasn't changed.
that's
So
right.
you can, I myself took my GMAT, I think 5 years prior, but that was because I was in an assignment where I had a lot of free time. I studied for
Yeah,
2 hours a day. I took one test a week. I naively thought that I would be smart enough to like get a 740 on 2 weeks of practice. It took me about 4 months to get to a point that I was comfortable with, and then
yeah.
it stayed for 5 years. So I would just add like you can
You
take the
can do that
GMAT
early.
GRE, you know, if you know that
That's
you're going to
that's
be
a
deployed
great
or
that's a great
something.
call out. Yeah, you can definitely do it earlier. Typically, it's as you start to think more seriously about when you should apply, you do have it for 5 years. So you don't want to take it so early that that's going to expire and you have to restudy. But to your point, and I think it's probably especially in something like the military, there are going to be phases of of time off,
Mm,
and you should be taking advantage of that. Because it's a lot to juggle when you're doing that plus all of the other application. You don't want to be
right.
taking like 2 weeks before, which happens and you can do, but it's not preferred. There's so much more that you're going to need to be
Yeah.
doing.
Plan for months of studying, not weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's often, 100 plus hours. So that's what I would expect. Yeah, and then you're thinking about some of those schools we had talked about, making sure you're getting your recommenders lined up and figuring out what are the recommender requirements for the schools you're applying to, starting to dig into your story. Some people I know will actually kind of like draft their story and sort of like edit it over time. And so you can be, if you know this is a goal you have, you can be thinking about that early. Um, but I wouldn't write your essays like too far out because things are going to change and your accomplishment.
Sure.
So that's important.
Yeah.
Um, as you start to get like into sort of like application, like things are ramping. This is when you find a coach and start to like actually, if depending on your situation, I would say, and Wyatt, me and you have talked about this, but if you are someone that's just like doesn't really know where to start, having someone that can help you start to finish is super, super valuable. If you're someone that feels like you have a lot of support, then you can get less help from a coach and kind of dive deep into essays or other topics. But I would say don't underestimate how much work goes into
Yeah.
the job here and like preparing your recommenders and making sure your story is really strong. Like you want to do this well and it's worth getting enough help to make that happen. But you don't
Yeah.
need $20,000 or more on this.
No, I completely agree. I like how, I mean, Leland, like, full disclosure, we're not getting paid for this, and I just like what you're doing at Leland. I think it helps vets, and I think it's needed. Um, so I'm saying, I'm saying this as someone that doesn't have a vested interest, but like one thing I really like about Leland is you can kind of like start and maybe you say like, I just need someone to like bounce a few ideas off. I'm going to go get a coach for like, $60 an hour and just talk to them, find an hour and see if I like them. I mean, you guys do free intro calls too, right? So you can kind of
Yeah.
see if your coach should match your personality. I also tell vets like don't necessarily seek out a vet, right? Which isn't maybe in my best interest because I am a coach on Leland, but maybe like go find someone that doesn't speak vet languages because the adcoms aren't vets. Most of them are like, 40 to 50-year-old people that have no background in the military. So, check out Leland. There's so many different options. Like, I like how you don't have to commit beforehand to a giant package. And maybe you start going and you're like, man, I need a lot more help. And maybe you talk to a coach and they're like, you know what? You're pretty good. You've clearly done enough research. Maybe you have friends and family that are, in an MBA program. But I will say, like, finding a coach is important. Vets clubs, like, go talk to the vets clubs, go talk to
Yeah.
your friends. But like, you're going to get what you pay for, and you're going to get someone's 30 to 60 minutes probably free, but you're probably not going to get much value beyond that unless you start paying, right? Unless they're your very best friend. So if I get someone that I'm coaching for, like, that's a job. I'm going to make sure that I deliver for them. So yeah, that's what I say about coaching. Like, you get what you pay for. So if you pay zero, like, you're probably not going to get a great outcome.
Yeah, yeah, and there are some good free options, but you're absolutely right that it ends up being, you get an hour here or there, but you don't get someone in the weeds like in the trenches with you
No.
actually happen. Yeah, and we have dozens of vets on the platform and also adcoms and other folks that you can kind of find something that you're looking for. But then yeah, then that's when you start going through a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, kind of preparing your recommender prep docs, starting to get them set up. And we have a bunch of recommender prep templates that we can give you for free. So feel free to ping us. We have bunch of essay brainstorming resources and other things. So starting to dig in on your actual story, figuring out you know what that narrative is going to look like, diving into a resume, awards and honors, extracurriculars, everything there. So there's a lot that goes into it, but you can tackle it. Let's move on to some of the next topics. So we've talked about this a little bit, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on an MBA resume, but really this is like the document that captures your professional, academic, and personal life on one page. And it's not just your life, it's your achievements. Sort of lays the foundation. My HBS interview, they kind of like went through bullets on my resume. So this is not uncommon for people to go spend a lot of time in the interview actually going to your resume. And it sort of lays that foundation, highlights your professionalism, some of the communication skills around like what you've done. It helps you sort of distill what you've done in a clear way for people. And I think is more important than some people give credit for. I think oftentimes adcoms will actually start there and kind of get the snapshot of who this person is. So you don't want to underestimate that. And there are templates that we can get you to make sure that it's
Yeah.
like don't type in like resume online and just like find some
Yeah.
Canva like
Each
it's
school, like,
colory and
e-
everything. Keep it simple and yeah.
yeah, each school has their format. Like, I tell kids, like, you're not going to get accepted or denied to a school because you had their resume format. Like, there's many things that are more important than that. So don't spend your time, like, especially if you're not someone that's fluent in Microsoft Office, like trying to get your dates here because that's what HB, like, trust me, HBS, GSB, and like to a lesser extent Wharton, Booth, like, you're gonna go there if you get accepted. Like, especially HBS and GSB, they're not gonna be like, man, does this kid really want to come here? Like, that's not what they're going to be admitting you on. There's so much more to your resume. Most of the schools look almost the same.
Yeah.
But definitely don't be getting resumes that have like skills at the top and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
putting your stuff in like weird italics, federal resumes. We have a resume template on Sitreps. Like,
Oh,
start and
nice.
then
Great.
iterate. Like, get a coach, get someone, show it to people, and just make sure that it makes sense, and then really start to perfect it. But yeah,
Yeah.
use an MBA application resume. Don't go Google resumes and
Yeah.
like put your headshot on it. No
Yes.
colors, please. No, don't
Yes.
send me another orange resume.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, big plus one to all of that. Okay, so recommendations. We've talked about this a little bit. I want to kind of highlight a few things and why you touched on some of these, but let's just go through some of them. So they need to have a strong relationship with you. One needs to be a direct supervisor. And they ideally are kind of the two recommendations kind of have complementary perspectives. So ideally they're not telling the same stories. They can be overlapping in sort of like the traits that you're illustrating, but you don't want to be yeah, you don't want to have them like say the same things because it's just not going to accomplish much. The credibility piece you mentioned, like co-founders or other people that are peers or family members, like you need to be really mindful that they will lose credibility and they will not be as strong if it feels like a friend is writing this for you. Um,
Hmm.
and this is something they can do in the recommendation itself. Like they can highlight um, things that build their credibility. Like I have worked with hundreds of platoon leaders, and Wyatt was, special because of this, this, and this. So there's ways that they can kind of build that credibility in the actual recommendation itself.
And you should write some docs. I mean, it doesn't have to be insane, but prepping and coaching your recommenders is important. Like a lot of these recommenders, especially military, like if you're coming from banks or consultancies, like most of your recommenders have been to an MBA program. None of my recommenders had an MBA. Um,
Yeah.
a couple of the people, I had one that kind of fell through, just was too busy. But I started with the strategy of like asking for people so that people fell through. Like one of the people I asked like didn't even know what an MBA really was. They were like, "Oh yeah, grad school." Like, okay, like I have a grad degree from Embry-Riddle. Like, okay, great. It's a little different. So like some of these people you're going to talk to, they don't know like why you're applying. They think this is like just okay, yeah, I can write a rec. Like you're a good person. Great. So you want to kind of give them examples. You want to feed them stuff that's going to tie into your narrative. One thing that I've heard, the dirty secret is there are people that will write their own, right? Um, I've met kids that are like, oh, I had to write my own. My MD at my bank said that I had to. And I had a friend in the military that his commander is like, oh, just write it, I'll sign it. And the universal advice that I've heard from AdComs is that like not that they necessarily can tell, but that self-written letters will be less superlative and less good. Like you'll be worried about like, oh man, I don't want to say I'm the best. But like your commanders, like my letters, I got them back and I was like, wow, I'm pretty awesome. Like I wouldn't have said this about myself. They were like you said, Wyatt is in the 20 years, he's the best officer I've worked with. He implemented these systems. It was the most brilliant idea ever. I'm like, dude, I would have just been like, Wyatt's pretty good. Like he's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. No, totally. I
So
mean, they should be saying things that you'd feel uncomfortable saying about yourself. It's not uncommon for people to ask you to write the rec, and that is a big reason why preparing them matters. Because if you come to them with a two-page document that says, "Hey, here are the questions you're going to be asked. Here's some ideas of things that I want you to highlight, and some specific examples you can cover," it's so much more likely that they'll take that and say, "All right, this person's done a lot of work. I'll go and like execute on it." Than if you just show up and say, "Hey, you want to write a recommendation for me?"
yeah.
It's just harder. And I think when you're trying to figure out who to have do it, if there are any folks on the kind of the border questions that you have, I would have a conversation with them and say, "Hey, I'm still learning about the process, but I wanted to see if you'd be open to writing a recommendation for me." And that question is so revealing because you'll get some people that will say, "Yes, Wyatt, I'd love to do that. Like, please, like I'd love to kind of pound the table for you." And then you'll get others that will be like, "Yeah, like, are you sure I'm the best person? I don't, yeah, happy to do it if you want me to, but I don't know if I'm the right." And it's like, avoid those, right? You want people that
Yeah.
are really excited, and kind of feel like your success is their success. Um,
Yeah.
so, and then again, like the nice to haves, these are again nice to have and not critical. If they have a tie to the school, sure, great. If they have an MBA, that's awesome. But if they don't, like, it's not a big deal. It's much more important that they have all these other things. Most people that write recommendations do not have ties to the schools you're applying to. And then seniority or clout, only if the rest of these boxes are checked. So if they have a relationship
Yeah.
with you,
If you've been a general's aide, if you worked for,
that's right.
if you were a in the army, like an XO at the brigade level, company, and there's an O6 or a colonel that actually knows you. Don't just say, "Oh, my dad's buddy from West Point is, a 4 star." That'll be so cool. It fails. It's not good.
Yes. Yeah. It would be much worse to have like the president of the United States writing a recommendation for you if they don't know you than to have
Right.
someone really rave about you. Um, okay. So yeah, let's talk about essays briefly. They're kind of like three types of essays you'll typically see, and it's sort of hard to bucket all of them, but you have like the personal statement essays that are what matters most to you and why, what else do you want us to know about you, a cover letter, what are kind of your values. This is a lot of like, this requires some deep self-reflection to figure out what is my story, what does actually matter to me, why should that matter to them. um, and then you'll get a lot of the why this school essays. So how do you plan to use the Wharton MBA program to achieve your goals, or why Stanford, or why do you feel like Columbia is a good fit for you? And then you'll get kind of like this lump of other types of questions that are sort of behavioral prompts. Tell us about a time you had a positive impact, or share a time in which you engaged with a different perspective, community, experience, et cetera. How did it shape your worldview? Or even things like describe the biggest commitment you've ever made, which
Yeah.
you probably have good, big commitments you've made in your life, such as joining the military. But I think that there are, you'll see kind of a range of different types of essays, and they answer their question. I think a lot of times I'll read essays that people have written and I'm like, this is a good essay that doesn't address the question they asked you at all.
Yeah.
So like,
Also, does it need to be something? I mean, especially you look at like Stanford, right? That one takes a lot of reflection.
yeah,
Booth's is very similar to Stanford's and HBS's. I think it literally says like, what else is not in your application? Super
yep.
open ended. Um, I remember I got this book of like like quote unquote successful essays, right? Of admit to GSB and HBS. And it was like, oh, like you're gonna see a formula. I remember reading through like 60 and I was like, there is zero pattern. There are some that are amazing, right? There was like one that was like, what matters most is like freedom. And it talked about like being a refugee from South Sudan and like carrying his mom and his brother, and like you were like crying. And then there was another one that was like the family dinners on Sundays, and it was a person from the Midwest, pretty like meaning, like you could tell that they had thought to it. But I was like, wow, those are very different.
Yep.
Structures were different, topics were different. I think everyone kind of thinks like, oh, there's this like I need to have a Superman story to make the GSB essay work or the HBS essay work. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a really good call out. So there isn't a formula per se, but there is a style of writing here that I think you can miss the mark on. And I would say the style is it's storytelling. It's productive storytelling is how I would describe it.
Yeah.
This is not a creative or writing assignment. You are not trying to describe like the color of the dirt in this like village. Like you can, but like be really careful that it doesn't turn into like this like almost like you're writing a book or an essay that you've written in school. Like you need to tell them stories that help them understand the answers to these questions, and then also give them a clear picture on why your life is going to matter in the world. And so it can, again, I said this earlier, but like your life, you can make it matter to them because your perspective is different. It doesn't have to be like they've read everything, right? They've heard all the stories. They've heard the refugee stories, they've heard the immigrant stories, they've heard the military stories. And of course, there are going to be nuances that are a little bit different here or there. But what they haven't heard is your perspective on this story and
Yeah.
why that like has shaped who you are and what matters to you. And whether that is Sunday dinners with the family, or it's clean air, or it's education, opportunity or freedom, or whatever it is, like um, that perspective and that depth of thought and reflection is really what's going to move the needle for them, and going to leave them actually thinking at the end of the night, like, oh, that was super interesting and it really moved me. I think it doesn't, again, you don't need to have any sort of crazy medal or award, or be in the Olympics. Some of your classmates will have those, and that's great, but most of your classmates won't. And most of the time they're just smart, hardworking people doing their best, and they care. And so you
Yeah.
can you can show them that you fit that bill for sure. Okay, so just to kind of like wrap up, I know we're kind of at time here, but um, start to think about GMAT GRE early, as Wyatt said. You have 5 years, get that knocked out at least 6 to 12 months in advance. Get involved in your community or on campus. This applies to people that are earlier on in their career, but start to think about extracurricular activities or things you can do to go above and beyond. Build those relationships with your potential recommenders. Start to reflect on the story that you might want to share, and honestly, what you want to do post MBA. Why you even want an MBA? Because obviously there are lots of forces that might push you towards an MBA or some sort of like transition, but like start to think about why you'd even want to do that and how you're different because of your military experience, and then start to assemble that team of application supporters. And the coach is part of it, but so are friends, family, supporters that are going to be able to give you good, sound advice. Don't just trust one person that they got an MBA 20 years ago. Like make sure you're getting real good advice from people that know what they're talking about, and you'll be good to go. So yeah, with that, make sure you sign up for Leland. We're here to help. Have a bunch of free resources. Sitreps also has tons of amazing resources and does great events. We do a lot of events with them. Start early, don't procrastinate, and then yeah, good luck. You'll submit an application you're proud of.
Yeah, 100% agree with all that. Like I said, don't self-select. Like also, there's portions of the application you can't change. You can't change your GPA from undergrad. Like, don't worry about it. Just it is what it is, right? I know people with very high GPAs, and I know people with very low GPAs that are at basically every school across the top 20.
100%.
Also, there's portions like the GMAT. I met a guy, he's a vet actually, from GSB, and he took the GMAT the maximum amount of times you can. So I think it was 9. And he's like, I just kept taking it because I was like, this stupid test will not be the reason that like I don't get what I want. And he,
Yeah.
he eventually got I think a 740. And he's like, I was the last one, but he was getting like 630, 640, 630. And he's like, I just kept taking it and taking it and taking it. And, be persistent, but like, this is possible for everyone. Like, do not self-select out. Like, there are profiles you'll see at these schools that are amazing. Like you'll see, like you said, Olympian that also worked at McKinsey, that also founded a company that's also the nicest person you've ever met. And then there's people that you're like, huh, I, like you seem like a normal person, right?
Yeah.
So don't self-select out. There's a system for this. Leland has democratized that. So find a coach, figure out what your path is, talk to free resources like vets clubs, and then execute.
Yeah. Love it. Well, it's great. It's great chatting with you, Wyatt, and hope everyone listening feels excited and motivated. You got this. Definitely, yeah. Definitely don't rule yourself out. You're gonna do great, and it's an amazing experience. I think you'll be really grateful that you put the time in and made it happen. So, we're
Great.
if you need us.
Well, we will be on again soon with a breakdown more in depth of which schools you should be applying to, because they are quite different. So
Yeah.
look forward to that.
All right, man. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks, John.